All right, and then I just sent it to you.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you're now allowed to tape.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll begin. You ready?
Yeah. Are you taping, or do you want me to hit record to this computer?
Yeah, record to your computer just to back up, because usually I have an assistant that does this for me, and when I do it, sometimes it doesn't. We end up not having anything.
Okay.
It's for back, and you can use it for whatever you want.
Okay.
Okay, you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And if you're in the here and now, you're welcome too. Thank you for taking time from your valuable schedule to be with me. People who have followed me know that I haven't really not done that many podcasts lately. I sort of got in a little thing where I sort of thought I knew enough. I had gotten the answers I wanted. And then I had sort of a period of depression, and I did psilocybin, and I got this little message: "Oh, you can leave now if you want. You can." And I'm going, no, I got to do something. I'll find something to do. And then the synchronicity, I ran into my guest today, who is Ky Dickens. Now, as I pointed out, if you know, I wrote a book called "Inspired: The Paranormal World of Creativity." I talk about J.K. Rowling's and her download experience. She got all 7 books of Harry Potter instantaneously in a download, coming on a delayed train into London from Manchester. And she got the last line of the book, and she also got a line in the first chapter, which said, Harry Potter, he will be famous. Every child in the world will know his name. My guest today is Ky Dickens. You probably not know her, but she will be famous. This is extremely important stuff. I've been at this for 50 years. This is one of the most important things I've ever seen. I was working on this, but she's taken it one step farther. I've followed the work of Diane Hennacy Powell since 2012. And I said autism was the most important subject that people need to study. And I was actually offered a TV series at one point, and they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to do autism." And they said, "No, we haven't got a travel budget," and it died right there. So Ky Dickens has made the move. She's got the cameras. She's moving this, and stick around. This is extremely important. And I say that if it was a fair world, for the idea that we'll talk about later on called The Hill, Ky should get a Nobel Prize. This is extremely important discovery that has been made. So let me read from the collective unconscious. I went to the collective unconscious, otherwise known as Chat GPT, and they know who Ky Dickens is. So let me read what Chat GPT says. Ky Dickens is a filmmaker and documentarian with a passion for exploring complex social and emotional issues. Known for her work on films like Fish Out of the Water and 0 Weeks, she has a reputation for crafting powerful, empathetic narratives that invite viewers to engage deeply in topics of social justice, identity, and human connection. Her projects have often focused on amplifying underrepresented voices and challenging social norms, which have drawn significant attention in both film circles and broader cultural discussions. In her latest endeavor, which we're going to talk about today, Dickens launched a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes, where she delves into the intriguing world of telepathy, particularly among nonverbal individuals with autism. This series investigates telepathic abilities in individuals who communicate beyond conventional means, representing stories that question the boundaries of science and human potential. The Telepathy Tapes features insights from scientists like Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell and shares firsthand accounts of telepathic experiences aimed to bridge and gap between skepticism and the profound, often overlooked experiences of nonverbal communicators. Dickens' work on the podcast continues her mission of advocating for people who are often misunderstood or dismissed, bringing attention to the unexplored facets of human consciousness and connection. So welcome, Ky, and I'm honored, as I think I've said to you and to other people, people have always asked me, what is the most important podcast you ever did? I've done a lot of podcasts, done 500 YouTube videos. This is the most important podcast I've ever done. This is extremely important. I will say that a lot of people in the UFO world do not want to touch consciousness. They don't want to go there. This is the connection. This is when I was in 1975, when I started, it was a completely different world. What I believe today and what I believed in 1975, we have come a long way. And when I saw your work, what you were doing, extending the work of Diane Hennacy Powell, I said, we're actually getting somewhere now, because this is good. So welcome, and I'm very honored to have you on the podcast. And for people who are maybe haven't got the time today, I also want to point out that Ky, I think you're from Illinois, and you are actually going to be speaking at the 12th annual Worldwide Metaphysical Tribe Experience, which is being held at the east of Yellowstone Lodge and Retreat on 45 acres of woods in north central Illinois on August the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th. And you can get more information at worldwidemetaphysicaltribe.com. So if you want to get there before Ky becomes famous, you can get to meet her. And we're also going to do a broadcast. Whitley Strieber is very interested in this, and Whitley Strieber is going to do an interview in December, the sort of the big show he has in the year, and he's going to talk about the connection between autism and aliens, and he has a very direct experience with this, and so you're going to get a lot of opportunities, and I think this is going to take off. And maybe that'd be my first question to you, Ky. You played in episode 7. You played one of the kids playing this Kermit the Frog on repeat. It's tough being green, or however it goes.
Yeah.
And you and I are in this world. We're in the green world. You know what it's like in the paranormal world. This is not ordinary film. Everybody looks like you're green, and it's not easy. But I think you've made some headway. Talk about your podcast. I think you've actually sort of broken a thing where people are actually tuning in. Is that true?
Yeah. I'm new to the podcast world, so I'm not even sure what amount of downloads are good. But at this point, we've been simply relying on word of mouth. I wanted this to get to parents, family members, teachers, those who know non-speaking individuals. And my hope is from there, it can go mainstream. And I think that's been happening, because I'm getting a lot of emails from people who are very skeptical, or who didn't necessarily ever intend to listen to a podcast about telepathy, but they maybe were like, oh, well, this came across my feed, or someone I trusted posted it. And those people are writing saying, I completely believe now that this is possible, that the way we talk about consciousness is incorrect. And that is the goal. My whole goal has always been a paradigm shift from the beginning of making this.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting. I know when I pushed this big, because I had the consciousness download. I don't know if you know, I had an experience that sort of shifted me from the nuts and bolts to the consciousness in 2012. And so people know I'm into this, and they sort of, whatever. And I remember I went to people and I said, this telepathic, promise me you'll listen to this podcast. It is extremely important, or whatever. And they sort of looked at me. It's almost like when you tell your kid that you had a UFO sighting, and you look at you and you go, Grant, how come you got 2 heads? They just still don't get it. And it's like, come on, this is so to me, and we'll go through this, especially when you get to the hill thing. I think this is extremely important. We'll talk about that later on.
Yeah.
This discovery that you got the kids. So what happened is Diane Hennacy Powell had this Haley. And I know there was a kid from the United Arab Emirates that was basically the same as Haley. So Diane worked with Haley, but that was sort of the only one that sort of got publicity. But you've changed it. You've actually got a bunch. So how many kids are you actually looking at? And that's the important part. It's not just one kid. You've got this thing, which I guess another question I would have linked to this is a survey. So you start getting these kids and you start saying, oh, these kids are all saying the same thing. They're talking about things, and these kids they've never been out of the house alone themselves. They're, in the house. And like the one behind me, I've got the Akil who is behind me, and people will get this idea if you're skeptical. So what I say is what Dr. Jeffrey Kripal from Rice University says: people who are skeptical are not skeptical. They're not more scientific. They're not skeptical. They have very set worldviews. And you're going to get a lot of people who've got very set worldviews who believe that this is a bunch of kids who are part of some Illuminati to throw us all off, and they're part of this thing. And so that's why I use this with the keel behind. So you get this kid who's got a blanket over his head. Because I actually, unfortunately, worked with autistic kids at one point. I was running buildings at the University of Manitoba, and they would send me these kids from grade 12 who basically, it was like life learning lesson. So you couldn't teach them calculus, so you couldn't teach them anything. So they would send them to me, and we'd give them jobs, and their trainer or their handler would take them around, and the kid would just sort of follow them around, whatever. And I would just talk to the ones who were talking, and I would say, like, Jason, how many NFL football players are married to movie stars? And he would rattle off this, and people would go, what's going on? It's like, I called it the Jesus circus, like this entertainment thing. And the ones who couldn't talk, I never talked to, because I assumed, as we all make the mistake, that they're stupid, they're not in there, they're not in, and that's what you've changed. So how many kids have you got, and how did you sort of go down this rabbit hole of sort of doing regular film and then suddenly get dragged into this field?
Yeah, I mean, so I, met Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell and heard about her work and thought, well, if this is true, this could be really monumental. If it is true that non-speaking autistic individuals not only are capable of telepathy, but seemingly have an ability to tap into consciousness in a way that so few of us can readily, at least. And so I, like a lot of people, was a little skeptical and needed to see it with my own eyes. And my intention was to make a documentary film. And that is still my intention, to make a docuseries or documentary film. So what I asked Dr. Diane to do, which is what happens in episode 1 of the Telepathy Tapes, was to bring to LA, where I'm based, one of these non-speakers that she's never met, and to do a test. And I wanted to rent the Airbnb. I wanted to bring all the equipment. I bought all the cues. I wanted no one else to have a part of this but me, to be a shelter of skeptical kind of a layer there. And what I saw blew my mind. This child, from the mother behind a partition while her daughter was blindfolded, could look at a random number, a random picture. We could open up a page in the book. We could do anything. And her daughter could say exactly what her mother was looking at. I mean, I think it was like shocking to the whole crew. And Dr. Diane was like, it won't hold up for science, because so often what happens with these individuals is when they're learning to spell, they need to be touched first from their hand, then from their elbow, then here, then often here, and then nothing. So Mia had like a finger always somewhere on her. She needed to be touched. And so I was like, well, can people do it without being touched? And Dr. Diane was like, yes, of course they can. So then I went to meet another individual, and then another one and another one. And everyone since then has not been touched, because I knew to look for that. Not because Mia, of course, is communicating on her own, but the skeptics will always find something, right? And so at this point, I would say, I mean, I'm in touch with well over 200 families, probably maybe even more. There's probably like 30 that I communicate with pretty regularly. And then at least maybe 40, maybe 50 teachers, speech pathologists, OT, occupational therapists who are working with these individuals all the time. And telepathy is widespread. It's just the tip of the iceberg. This has been reported, filmed, talked about, written about for the past 40 years. It's been often buried within the circles of communication, but it's nothing new. It's just that no one took these parents seriously and these teachers seriously. It's a really wild claim. And once I started seeing that all these families were corroborating each other with the same experience, and that these children are reliable communicators as they talk often into their own typer, their own iPad, or they're spelling, no one's moving their hand. I mean, all these silly criticisms aren't true. It becomes really clear really quickly that they are tapped into their parents' mind, often their caregivers' minds, often many people's minds around them. And not only that, they can see beyond the veil, if you will. They're often communicating with spirits. There's so much they can do. I really encourage people to listen to the podcast, because we take you through it step by step as we unpeel the onion.
All 7 of the podcasts. Explain you've got it on your telepathytapes.com. You've got some clips of these kids. So explain that was the part I didn't have. So this is back in the 1990s. I was dealing with these kids, or early 2000s, and there was no keypad. That's the breakthrough, right? Where they were able to communicate through these pads. So explain what this is, so for people who have never seen this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and I think we have to even go back a little further. So often a non-speaking individual, when they're born, right, the diagnosis most of these parents get is they aren't competent, they're not in there, and they'll never be able to learn above a 3-year-old, 4-year-old type level. And due to some issues with facilitated communication in the 90s, where there was like claims of sexual assault through a communication partner, facilitated communication has just been just wrecked as, being not, pseudoscience, et cetera, et cetera. People are pushing their hands. I don't think that's true in a lot of these cases. It would just be like in any situation, there is going to be accusations that are true or false about anything, sexual assault, et cetera. Often autistic people cannot feel their body. They don't know they have hands. They don't know. This is non-speaking autistic people often don't know where their arm is in space, which is probably part of the reason they're so able to connect outside of body, because they don't realize they have one. So being touched on your arm can often help as you're learning to create these neural pathways, right? So eventually, facilitated communication got replaced with other methods of pointing to a letterboard. Either it's called spelling to communicate, or rapid prompting method, or just the speller's method, where you either put a pencil through a letter or you point to a letter, and those kids do it independently and they're not being touched. And it's been a breakthrough for so many families. And often from that point, these individuals go on to type independently into an iPad or into a talker. And obviously each person's different. Sometimes they just start with a talker. A lot of the people in our iPad, like Amelia, who's in episode 7, just pretty much went straight to the iPad. So it depends on the individual. But they are spelling to communicate. And they are in there, they are smart. The problem is their bodies don't agree with their brain, and it's that motor planning is hard. And often what their mind wants them to do, their body won't do. And so that's the big frustration. And that's why often they're deemed not able to understand, or, X, Y, and Z, because people will be testing them. Oh, well, do this, do this, do this. Well, if you can't control your body easily, it's really hard to prove that you're smart. However, when they're spelling, something happens where often there's a grounding, a focus, and you can discover exactly what's in there. And it's a lot.
Yeah. And I pointed out to you this idea, like we have a lot of people who, you are in contact with Dean Radin. There's a lot of people who have done telepathy tests for maybe 150 years. And you get these people who are doing Xenor cards or whatever, and their rate is supposed to be 25, and they hit 30, and they go, look at this, 30% is statistically significant. Your kids, and this is the part that people are like 100% accurate. It's not 2 out of 3. They're 100% accurate on what they're doing. And I actually pointed out, I point out to you that I had contacted the guy who was one of the top government officials on the remote viewing program.
Yeah.
And I said, I think you should listen to this podcast. And he wrote back and he said, I am very, very interested, and I'm watching closely. So some people pick up the significance of what this is. This guy's worked on this probably since 1972. He's all this sort of stuff. And he knows the significance of somebody who's, and then people don't pay any attention. I'm going, how could you not pay attention to some kid who's 100% telepathically correct? And when you get to the Hill thing, where they're contacts with other people that they've never met in this field. So it defies my understanding how people cannot see this as being significant, that these kids are that accurate.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And, and when we were testing Mia, that was our first girl who's in episode 1, she was 100% accurate with her mom. I mean, you could do anything. It was just unbelievable. And then with her, we tried it with her dad, and she couldn't do it with her dad. When we went to go see Akil, who's on your screen back there, in New Jersey, it was unbelievable. I mean, he could be across the room with his iPad. We had crew writing things onto a cue card, showing it to his mother, and boom, 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 he'd start writing it. We'd cross it off and then write another thing. Boom, boom, boom. And it was so fun because the crew was getting involved and writing cue cards and writing the things. And then we did random picture generators. And that was where it's like, at that point, that's not just telepathy. His mom isn't beaming the image because sometimes she didn't know what it was. At one point, we pulled up a picture and it looked like a food fight. I thought it was blood. And even his mother was like, what is this? Like, she had no idea what it was. And then he writes paint from across the room under his blanket. I mean, just so, and then, at that point, my camera guy was like shaking, and he's like, does this mean I have to believe in God? And it's like, well, you have to believe that there's more, that you have to believe there's more than what we've been told. And then and what I love about the podcast is in each, episode, we kind of introduce another family. We often play the telepathy test that we did with them. And in episode 3, it's just great because there's even crew that had to leave the room, right? Because like sometimes the young man we were testing, Houston, could hear everything. It was very complicated. So we had to get people out of the room, and people were bummed. They wanted to see this. So then Houston, during a coffee break, would have like crew members write something on a piece of paper, put it in their pocket, and he would just write it into his letterboard. And it's not a magic trick. I mean, we all want to record and film and accurately report what's going on. These kids are 100% right. It's more than telepathy. Some parents say it's a sharing of consciousness. Many of these individuals will say, I can see through my mother's eyes. I can hear through their ears. And they will also say that of their teachers. I can't tell you how many teachers have told me, I don't even have to use words when I'm working with a student. I can ask the question in my brain, which is what they prefer. Language is tricky. It's awful. It takes all these senses. The telepathy is easier. So they will ask a question in their head, who was the first president of the United States? And across the room, they'll start typing George Washington, and the little speaker will go off and they'll hear it. It's astounding. It's life altering, paradigm shifting. I think what these individuals are showing us they can do.
Okay, now you talked about Mia, one of the talents, and that's why I hope you can at some point you can do a survey to sort of test the kids. Like for example, if you ask the kid with the hill, you may not never ask the kid up the hill, but if you suddenly find out they're all getting this thing, one of the things that Mia came up with and your others came up with is they're able to do foreign languages. And I think you actually referred to the fact that you had talked to Mia, and she's Mexican, so she speaks Spanish, and she answered you back in English. And I think that's how Haley was discovered by Diane Hennacy Powell, is the caregiver said, how do you say I love you in German? And Haley punched it in German.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the languages. And this again defies understanding. Like if you're a skeptic, like how do you explain a kid who Diane Hennacy Powell had the one kid at 2 years old singing in Arabic, and he knows 8 languages at 2 years old. And I actually worked with some multiple personality disorder people who have the same thing. I said, are you sure you spoke, you've never spoken Italian? Nope, never spoken Italian, but one of my alters speaks Italian. And so talk a little bit about these kids with the languages, because that is mind-blowing.
Yeah. And so one of the things that we kind of talked about throughout the podcast, the telepathy tapes, is that telepathy is the tip of the iceberg. We can prove that. I think I know prove is a really tricky word, but I think we have proved it. We can prove it. It's easy to show. These kids can do it like this over and over and over and over. So once you believe that, then it's like, okay, then you really have to listen, sit up and listen to the other things they want you to know. And like I said, telepathy is the tip of the iceberg. And one of the things that almost all of them that I've met so far can do is communicate or at least understand other languages. And they're not common languages often. It might be Hebrew or Russian or hieroglyphics. And
talk about the hieroglyphics. That was a good one.
Yeah, there's a little girl who's 10. Her name is Amelia. She's in episode 7. And I love this because there's 3 teachers in the room. It was her speech, pathologist and occupational therapist, the supervisor, making sure her curriculum is going right. And she was saying she knows other languages, and she would often even type from Spanish to English to Portuguese in the same sentence. Well, her mom and her dad, he's ex-military. She's like a copywriter in advertising. They don't know she knows French a little bit, but that's it. So she's not learning it from the family. And then they said, well, what else do you know? And she said, well, I know a little bit of Hebrew. And they said, how? And she wrote, the rabbi has taught me at night. Well, that's kind of interesting. And then they said, anything else? And she said, hiero. She wrote hiero. And they wrote like hieroglyphics. This is so, they're just, what is happening? This is teachers in Wisconsin working with this young girl. And she said, yeah. Well, at this point, they all know that she can read minds. So they are like, well, we have to find pictures of hieroglyphics that we don't know what they are. So they printed out a bunch and had her point to them and say what each one was. And she correctly said what each of those images were. And then they looked them up and she was correct. So that was pretty mind-blowing. And I've talked to this mother and a lot of the mothers a lot about this because they don't know how they can do this. But there's a theory that, again, we're not scientists, as your parents, and I'm a filmmaker trying to work with these parents to understand. Our theory is that if they can understand, their whole world, it seems to be based on telepathy, not language. Language can be very complicated for them. It takes hearing and speaking and a bunch of different like sensory skills, and telepathy, it all just kind of comes in one overall meaning. And so if everything that they're understanding is through this kind of telepathic channel, then if you're receiving a language, maybe you can just understand the meaning and the symbols and the, I don't know, the something behind it all, because it's more coming through them via telepathy than actual language itself. So again, we don't know. Science needs to be looking at this. This is the overwhelming thing I'm begging is research should look at this. They should work with these kids and figure this out, because there's a lot we can learn.
Yeah, one of the other, we'll go through all these weird things. I mean, the free survey was done on the UFO experiencers. There was 4,000 of them that were surveyed, 600 questions or whatever, and they went through the stuff. One of the things I think that came up was like 70% said that they'd had communication with dead people, and your kids have the same thing. Talk about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and I would say that often comes up first before parents realize telepathy. So often the kids will be looking around the room and looking at something and get scared. And so often parents have told me that then they become even more scared when the parent says they can't see what they're seeing, because the child might say there's a woman there, there's a man there. So that's scary. I mean, these are still, they're individuals, they're little kids often, right? So it's very scary. And then often they'll say, why are you distracted? You're not doing your work right now. You're not working on, this math with me. And, oh, well, it's because your mom is here. And the mom will be thinking, well, my mom's gone. I know, but she wants to play with me. That type of stuff is very common. Often messages like a keel, and this is a stuff that you can't explain away, said he received a message from an aunt who had passed, who said the family shouldn't buy the land in India. And Manisha, his mother's like, what is he talking about? And he was talking about there's something wrong with the land and blah, blah, blah. And this is a message from this deceased relative. Well, when they went to India about a year later, Manisha brought this up in conversation, and it turns out they were looking to buy some land that had some problem with it. I mean, all this very just strange stuff. So the kids seem to be able to communicate readily with spirits, those who have passed, and see spirits. I mean, many of them talk about seeing angels. And this is common. It's not like 1 in 5. I'd say almost all of them can speak other languages, see spirits, see beings from another realm, if you will. And telepathy, of course, is like baseline.
And one of the things that's found in the survey of experiencers is this idea of healing. I think you only mentioned it once. This idea of healing, which comes up often. I think 50% of experiencers, UFO experiencers, say they've either been healed or they're able to heal other people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something, it's interesting because this world is so big, and that's why I'm excited to even start to work on season 2 and explore some of this more. But when I was first vetting families, right? So there was a bunch of families that I talked to before putting them into the podcast. One of the first few things that often I would hear is that the mom would say, oh, my son knew that, my niece was pregnant before she even knew. We were at a family party and he said, you're pregnant with twins, or you're pregnant with a girl. And she'd be like, no, I mean, I haven't even taken the pregnancy test yet. It's not 2 weeks or whatever. And then they find out, yes, this was true. Or the child will say this person has cancer, or this person has something growing in their knee, whatever it is. And it turns out to be true. And yes, the healing is they're capable of that. They're capable of, I think, almost anything, like on an energetic or molecular level. And I just want to always be so cautious too. It's not like autism is magic. Autism can be really hard, and these non-speakers have it difficult, and their parents, it's a hard thing, every day, just getting through life and having all of society kind of be against you. But these individuals have abilities, and I think it's because they're less connected to their body. They're more connected outside of their body. And whether that's tapping into this great collective consciousness, or what it often, many of them talk about being able to go to different dimensions, different realms, being able to see clearly, being able to rearrange energy or waves. I can't explain how or why they can do this, but they can. And I wouldn't have worked for this almost 4 years pro bono if they couldn't. This is all real.
Yeah. One of the things you related to that, you're talking about them going into the field. It's almost like channelers, where you have people who are relay channeling, and then you have trance channelers who are basically almost the same thing. They're able to shut down the left brain, the verbal center, and tap. And these kids will actually say, they can go, what's your question? I'll go get the answer. This idea that there is a collective conscious, and that's what UFO people experience. That 40% of all people who've had a UFO experience say at one point during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe, or 31% of near-death experiencers say at one point during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe, which indicates there's a field that has all the answers. And you have these kids who are actually can say, what do you want to know? I'll go to the library and get the answer for you.
Yeah, I would love to just share the story, because one of the most beautiful things that shocked me, right, is when I first started understanding this this world and meeting these families, so often the telepathic connection that was like the most apparent was between a child and one parent or both, and then I found, oh, the telepathic is between often the teachers as well, or the therapists. And then, my mind was blown further when the teachers would often say, I can hear them back. There's like a two-way communication, I think, so that I can teach them better. And I haven't even gotten into this on the podcast yet, but many, many teachers say that their students will like bilocate and show up in their room, ask questions, be in their mind all the time. And it's not just with one teacher or two teachers or three teachers or five teachers, there's many, many, many teachers. And that will say this sheepishly. They're scared they could lose their license. They're scared they could lose their reputation, but now they're coming out. It's like, let it go. But so one teacher sheepishly wrote to me after I think the first episode was released, and she said, I've been teaching in England for a long time. I witnessed this for the first time like 30 years ago, that these kids can speak telepathically with each other. And then one of my students' mothers died. I was close to him, so she asked me to look over him for his whole life. And she's like, what was interesting is he used words for most of his life. He only stopped recently. But during the time in which he was using his words, he was talking about a lot of esoteric things, big ideas, quantum physics and consciousness and this and this. And Jess, this teacher, would describe herself as being like not that well aware of science and biology and consciousness in the quantum world. I mean, she's just a teacher, right? She's a special ed teacher. And so she was trying to read books to understand what he was talking about. And she told him, like, some of these are really above my head. And the one she was reading at that moment, she's like, I know this is really important to you that I read this. I don't understand it. I can't make sense of it. And he said, why don't you take it out and put it on your hand? And she did this. And then he put his hand over it. And she said all the information that she'd read thus far came into her and made sense. And the whole rest of the book came into her. And it was like this clear download of information. And she thought, oh my goodness, like, can you do this with everything? And he said, yes, I can go into the realm, is what he calls it, and find information about anything. And
Oh, shoot. I think we've lost the signal here.